Big thank you to our two readers, those very important passages. Now, last week, we looked at three very important prepositions. By grace, through faith, for good works. By, through, and for. And in that case, we looked at that triumvirate of important prepositions, and we're going to stay with the theme of three. We're going to look, in fact, at the 1 Corinthians 13 passage, and it falls into three parts. So this is St. Paul writing to the Corinthians, and it falls into verses 1 to 3, which speaks about the hugely important, the indispensable nature of love. Then you get to verses 4 to 7, which speaks about the qualities of love. And finally, the last section, verses 8 to 13, which talks about the durability and the supremacy of love. And just to complete the task of threes, we're going to end with those three Christian virtues: faith, hope, and love. So that's where we're heading this evening. But before we launch into this wonderful chapter on love, there's a preliminary observation. Many of you will have attended weddings where this portion of the Bible has been read. Indeed, it may have been read at your own wedding, I don't know. And it evokes a nice, warm, emotional, gooey feeling. Because they're lovely words, aren't they? In fact, I took a wedding 3 weeks ago for a couple who live on 5th Avenue, New York, but they didn't invite me over there. It was in a small Dorset village near where I live. He happened to be brought up there, that's why. And they asked for this passage to be read. And it's a lovely passage. But can I tell you that when this was first read to the congregation who were gathered in that Greek cosmopolitan city of Corinth, rather than gaining a warm, gooey, emotional feeling inside, they will have looked down at their feet, had sweaty palms, been red-faced, and totally embarrassed. Why? Because every facet of love, as described, particularly in that middle section, every facet of love corresponds to some point elsewhere in the letter where Paul takes them to task and berates them for behavior, speech, relationships, worship, the whole panoply of things where they have not been loving. Indeed, they have been rude. They have been selfish and irritable and boastful and self-seeking. So when he comes to this chapter 13, what he effectively is saying is, I'm going to show you what love is like. It's not what you have been displaying. So can you see, they were embarrassed by what they heard. It was a necessary chastisement. So, part one, those first three verses, the essential ingredient of love. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. It's totally out of harmony, and what an awful noise. And that's what our lives are like if they're not bathed in love, says Paul. Effectively, Paul is saying that your great plethora of esoteric gifts, spiritual gifts, your great knowledge, your impressive faith and sacrificial commitment, they're all empty gestures without love. Love is the essential ingredient. A few years ago, I was the vicar in St. Helier, Jersey, and whilst I was there, just for a bit of fun, I decided to organise a bake-off in the church. Anybody could enter, and I even arranged for a Michelin star chef on the island to come and judge the efforts. Well, the BBC got wind of this, and particularly since the vicar was having a go, they thought that was quirky enough to see a vicar in a dog collar and a baking apron that they wanted to relay it live. So they came round at the allotted time to my kitchen at my home where I was doing this baking. I should add, by the way, Carolyn was in London visiting one of our daughters. And they came, rang the doorbell, and Julie, the interviewer, and her sound technician rocked up. Well, after setting the scene, Julie went on to say, "Chris, your kitchen's a mess." Now, I do admit that I tend to make a big mess and then clear it all up at the end, but Carolyn was listening to this live in London. Her kitchen was a mess because I'd been let loose. I announced that I was making blueberry scones, or rather one big blueberry scone. And I timed my efforts to, at the predetermined time when she was going to come and interview me, I timed my efforts so that it would come out of the oven at the appropriate time. I set the cooker timer to ping. I just worked out how to do that. And I donned the oven gloves, reached down just as Julie said, "Chris, what's that bowl on the side?" And she pointed to a bowl of washed, dried, and chilled blueberries. I had produced blueberry scones without blueberries. The essential ingredient was missing. Needless to say, my efforts were not judged well by the Michelin star judge. Never mind, it's a lot of fun. That's minor, that's trivial, but love is not. Love is the essential ingredient. That cannot be missing. In our speech, our behavior. Without love, I am nothing, I gain nothing, says the apostle. So secondly, we come on to verses 4 to 7. What are the defining characteristics of love? What does it look like? How does it manifest itself? Well, the Apostle Paul outlines a number of characteristics. Some are expressed positively, it's like this and it's like this, and some negatively, well, it's not like this or that or that. So, brief checklist, here it is. Love is patient and kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud, it's not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres, and love never fails. Before we think about those characteristics of love, I want to sound a particular warning. Because we are most familiar or frequently encounter 1 Corinthians chapter 13 in the context of a wedding, as I said earlier. And it's too easy to interpret these descriptions in human terms only, i.e., how a husband and wife might respond to each other. But the word for love here, throughout this chapter, is a particularly peculiar word, Christian word, that word agape. Now, you might remember that C.S. Lewis in 1960 published a book called The Four Loves. It was the product of previous radio broadcasts he'd made on the same theme. Effectively, he says, look, we have in the English language this one word, love, but in the Greek of the New Testament, there are 4 different words used. There's eros, physical and sexual love. There's philia, which describes the affection we have, the brotherly love we have for each other. There is storge, which speaks of one's allegiance to and brotherhood with and bondmanship with maybe king and country. But none of those were adequate to describe the love which God has for us. God so loved the world. Well, it's not eros, philia, or storge. It had to be something special. When Jesus said in that second reading that we're to love as he loves us, it was agape love. So there's this very special word agape, which is giving love, selfless love, sacrificial love. And when Paul is writing this chapter in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he's saying this is what we're called upon to exhibit. It must have all those Christlike qualities. This agape love of giving, sacrifice, and selflessness. The very life which Jesus lived. So let's not degrade God's love and bring it down to a merely reflection on human performance. No, think of godly love, this agape love, and aspire to that and seek the Holy Spirit's enabling to live that out. We'll sing later the hymn by Wesley, Love Divine, All Love's Excelling. You see, it exceeds all other human aspects of love, all other human representations of love. God's love. And as Jesus expressed it, love one another as I have loved you. We aspire to that quality of love. Not eros, philia, storge, but agape. So this letter is primarily addressing relationships within the church community, and only secondarily our general wider sphere of relationships. We are to love one another as Jesus has and does love us, with a love that gives, that is sacrificial and is selfless. At the start of the 3rd century, there was in Carthage, North Africa is present-day Tunisia, there was in Carthage a great thinker, theologian called Tertullian. And he lived amongst these pagan communities who were brutish and their behavior was filled with superstition and immorality. He lived amongst these people and he imagined that set against that backdrop, the Christian community would evoke within the wider populace admiration, as people would say, see how these Christians love one another, how they would readily die for one another, because it stood in such stark contrast to the immorality, the brutish and the superstitious behavior that he encountered in his pagan city of Carthage. Such love, you see, is the true hallmark of Christian living. When I was a student, many decades ago, I made my first journey to Switzerland. And one of the most influential people on my young Christian life was a chap called Dr. Francis Schaeffer. And I had read many of his books, and it prompted me just to get on a flight initially, and then a train, and make my way up to Huy-Moussolon, just below Villars, where he and his wife Edith lived. I didn't make any prior arrangement. I just rocked up on his doorstep, and I spent the week sleeping on his floor and eating at his table. And it was exhilarating to be part of that L'Abri community for that short while. And one of the books that he brought out was probably the shortest, but maybe the most impactful, The Mark of the Christian. It's still for sale on Amazon, and it was an appendix in a bigger book, but it was also printed alone by itself. The Mark of the Christian, and he outlined how agape love is what really defines us. Not just our adherence to certain creeds or anything like that. It's agape love. Like the Corinthian Christians, we too should hang our heads in shame if we don't make Christlike love our model, our passion, and our practice. And the final section, verses 8 to 13, very briefly, basically underscores the truth of that. When societal structures crumble, as Tertullian observed in Carthage, agape love remains. When our mortality catches up with us, agape love remains. When prophecies, knowledge, and other spiritual features wane, agape love remains. Love is supreme and enduring. One of the things I've been doing during my 12 days here is quietly reading the massive tome of Victor Hugo's classic novel Les Miserables. And I'm preparing for a lecture I'm giving back in the autumn, forward in the autumn. And you may know Jean Valjean in that novel is a released convict, and he ended up at the home of the Bishop of Digne, and there Valjean encountered selfless Christian love in a remarkable way. And this deeply impacted Jean Valjean. And some years later, when the bishop dies, Victor Hugo incorporates these words into the epic saga. The supreme happiness of life is the conviction that we are loved for ourselves. Say rather, loved despite ourselves. And this is an apt description of Christ's love for us. And what we are summoned to demonstrate one to another, Val John experienced it and became a changed man. And so the third section, verses 8 to 13, basically underscores this great truth. And just to make sure that these Corinthians and we ourselves haven't yet grasped the enormity of what he is saying here, Paul nestles love between two other great virtues, faith and hope. And he says, what do you know? Love even outstrips these. So friends, return to these verses and return to them often. Consider if Paul had written these words not to Corinth, but specifically to our fellowship. Would we be hanging our heads, embarrassed and shameful? Or can we say, Lord, I do love you a little, but help me to love you and those whom you have given me so much more. And may my love be that agape love which is selfless, sacrificial, and giving, and infectious when it's viewed by a watching world. Amen.